And we are now officially live with Dr. Komal Kumar, but your friends call you Coco.
That's correct.
And you are not just a regular doctor, you have specialized in transplants, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to hear a little bit more about what you with an American accent would be doing in South Africa. And before you even tell me that, I would love for you to tell me, how did you get to do the medicine route? What was the motivating factor to push you in that direction?
Okay. So my name is Komal Kumar, everybody, but everyone calls me Coco. And what I actually trained in is epidemiology and public health. So I specialized in epidemiology, which is the study of people. And so what I focused all of my time on is organ donation and transplantation. And how I got there was my interest in science and math. And so I always loved my science classes. I think we were talking about this earlier, that I loved dissecting the cow eye. Like in middle school and in high school, when we had dissections in science class or biology, I think that's the one thing that really got me excited. I loved anatomy and physiology, and that's what sort of got me hooked. Then I decided to study at Johns Hopkins for college, studied public health. Then I did another degree, a master's in public health, again at Johns Hopkins. And then I got the Fulbright Scholarship, which brought me here to South Africa.
What is a Fulbright Scholarship?
Okay, so the Fulbright Scholarship is a government-funded scholarship that is basically focused on cultural immersion. And so that's their main theme. Another thing that you could do with the Fulbright Scholarship is pose a research question and answer that in a year with a specific mentor in a specific country. And so that's the track that I chose to do. I chose to come to South Africa to work with Dr. Elmi Muller here at Groote Schuur Hospital in Cape Town. And I wanted to research HIV-to-HIV kidney transplants.
So now this is the big thing, that you were not just doing transplants, a regular transplant. Someone needs a liver or a kidney, and you take one organ and put it into another person's body. You were focusing specifically on HIV-to-HIV. Why would one need to focus on that?
Well, I think it's a long story that goes back to 2000, probably earlier than that, but in 2008. So here in South Africa, if everybody around the world knows, there's a huge HIV epidemic that went around here and is still going on. In 2008, there was a big height of new cases of HIV. What happens basically is your HIV starts to attack your kidneys. And so then you have people who have HIV and also kidney disease. So what do you do with those people? Well, you got to replace their kidneys, and that's sort of where transplantation came in. The problems that we had here in South Africa was that there was a lot of stigma surrounding HIV and a lot of discrimination. And so people with HIV weren't really allowed to get any type of care and any type of dialysis for their kidneys or transplantation for that matter. And so my mentor, Dr. Muller, here said, we have to do something about these patients. They're going home to die, so we're going to transplant them. So what happened was she took a kidney from someone who had HIV and passed away and transplanted it into someone who was in need and also had HIV. And that's when it all started back in 2008.
What are the benefits of going from HIV to HIV? Obviously, ideally, you would like a healthy person who's just passed away to donate their kidney. But most people are going to say, why would you go and give a healthy kidney to someone who's got HIV, who is already on a course towards the big room in the sky? Yeah. Rather give them a kidney from someone who's also got HIV. But doesn't that make them more sick or less sick? What are the complications in that?
So, touch wood, it's been 10 years since the first one, and the results have been fantastic. We haven't had any cases of super infection or some crazy new virus that came out if you transplanted an HIV kidney into someone with HIV. I think when it goes back to the benefit of what you're talking about, organ donation, the field, there's a huge supply and demand crisis going on. And so when you're able to use organs from people with HIV and sort of give that to people with HIV, you sort of free up the kidneys that are available from people without HIV for the people who need kidneys without HIV also. So there's already a strain on the demand for kidneys, and there's not a lot, there's not a supply. There's not enough supply of them.
But now you said that HIV does harm the kidneys. So does that mean you are taking kidneys that are not in a good position to start with and putting them into other HIV patients, or you're looking for kidneys that have not been touched by HIV?
For which people? So you have
okay. So let's qualify that. So I'm someone with HIV,
yeah,
and I now need a new kidney. But the people who've got HIV,
yeah,
their kidneys are impacted in some way.
They can be,
but they're not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
So then you have to find the kidneys that are not like that, and then you still have to match them to the donor with the various requirements that you need. And I mean, it's quite a complicated process.
Yes, it's very, very complicated. And also there's people who pass away with HIV who are taking their medications regularly, their ARVs, things like that. And so their kidneys are totally fine, or their HIV wasn't attacking their kidneys. So it's not always the case that, you know, people with HIV are going to get kidney disease. That's not the case.
Okay, so let's just go through the basics. Someone is in need of a kidney or a heart or lungs.
Mm-hmm.
Which are the most complicated ones to do?
Surgery-wise?
Yeah.
Liver. The one you didn't even mention, but it's totally fine.
Why a heart and lungs must be very complicated.
Yeah, you think so, but there's just a few tubes that you got to think about.
Okay, so why the liver?
The liver is complicated because the liver is one of the organs that regenerates. Remember that?
Okay.
So when you do a liver transplant, you only take a segment of the liver. And you take that and then transplant it into someone else, and that segment will then grow and regenerate into a whole new liver. So taking a piece of a liver through all those little vessels and veins and arteries that are in your liver, that's what's complicated. That's cutting out that segment is what's hard.
How do you determine which piece to cut?
Technology.
Technology. Wow, this is fascinating. So once you've cut the liver, before you can even get to that stage, what are the prerequisites to make sure that an organ will match another person's body?
So one of the basic one is blood type compatibility, right? So A's, A, B.
But can't you remove the blood altogether and then cleanse the organ and then put it into the person's body? Why would the blood type make a difference?
It does. It just does.
It just does.
You
heard it from the doctor, okay?
Because you can't just flush everything out. I mean, you want the blood to still be in the organs when you're transplanting it to somebody else.
Okay.
And so you have blood type compatibility, and then you have HLA antibodies and antigens, so the things that attack each other. So if some like foreign particle comes into your body, like you have a flu or something like that, your body's going to attack that. So we need to make sure that this foreign liver or this foreign kidney, your body doesn't start attacking it. So there are tests.
Is that what they call organ rejection?
Yes.
Okay.
So those are things that you have to make sure of. So it's going to be blood type first, and then HLA antigen compatibility.
When someone has an organ transplant, does that mean that for the rest of their life they have to be on medication to ensure that their body doesn't reject it?
Yeah.
Or do you reach a certain point where you cross a threshold and they go, well, by now your body's probably accepted it, it's fine?
No, you have to be on medications. You're going to be on immunosuppressive medications for the rest of your life.
Why?
Because we haven't come up with cool stem cell therapies to overcome that yet.
But now some people are saying that if you want to reduce the amount of medication that you need to sustain this non-rejection of the liver or the kidneys, whatever it is, you could do a bone marrow transplant also.
You could.
Is that a commonplace?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's something we're at the moment.
But you're not at that yet.
No.
So this type of medical procedure is still in its infancy, so to speak. I mean, how many years have they been doing this? Since Chris Barnard did the first heart transplant?
In the 50s, yeah.
So it hasn't been around for that much time, but obviously technology is improving.
Correct.
So how much has, for example, a heart transplant changed since the first time that it happened? Or do they still use the same procedures?
I mean, I think most of the heart transplant procedures are the same. I think what I know specifically more is of kidneys and what's happened with the kidneys.
So how have kidneys evolved the procedures?
In terms of the procedure itself, previously they used to do an open procedure, which means you just cut open, literally, a large laceration in your stomach to get out that kidney. And now we've moved to laparoscopic, which is what do you mean, no?
How do you do a kidney transplant laparoscopically?
So then you make these little incisions that so you go from an open laceration, which is this big, across your belly, to little incisions around your belly, and you put in those little laparoscopic tools, and you're working inside through like cameras and things.
But you're going to get the kidney out, and you've got to put a kidney in.
Yeah.
And I mean,
you're just going to have to come and see for yourself.
Oh boy, I mean, this is fascinating. So I mean, don't you have to open up to really get a look to see what's going on in case there are any complications?
No, you can see a little camera. You can see everything. How everyone can see us right now, and we can see them.
I'm not entirely convinced of this because you see, I know that if I have a camera and I'm zooming and I'm running around, I mean, I've seen people put on cameras and you have no idea what they're actually looking at. So how do they really know what they're looking at?
No, so the tools that are made, I mean, it's like basically your hand. Anything you move, you are handling those movements over here when you're doing like a cut or not a cut. And then at the end of the little laparoscopic tool, you have a camera as well as a light. And so you, as a person, is looking at the camera like by the OR and sort of navigating where and what you want to see. So if you want to check this artery before you cut it, or if you want to check this vein before you cut it, you're just moving around in there.
It's complicated.
No,
that is,
I don't think
I mean,
so.
I'll tell you what I'm worried about. So here you have an organ and you have things pushed against it. So, I mean, you could push it away and have a look, but then it keeps coming back again. If you open up, you can put clamps and you can hold things apart.
No, you're also prone to infection if you're going to do all that. All your hands everywhere and the incision being so big.
How long does it take to have a kidney transplant?
To get a kidney or to actually do the surgery?
Well, to do both. To get a kidney and for the transplant.
Okay, so let's just finish the surgical stuff
since
we're already here. It only takes about, I'd say, 3 hours. 3 to 4 hours.
Is that a long time?
No, that's a short time.
Short time for a transplant. And they leave and they only have 2 little holes and that's it.
Yeah.
Which is the most common of the transplants? Kidneys?
Kidneys.
Because you can operate on one, so people can still be alive when they donate a kidney.
Correct. And that comes to the second question of how long do you wait? And people all over the world are waiting a very, very long time, which is basically why I'm passionate about what I do and why I'm standing here in front of everybody. And it's just a very long time to get a kidney because not a lot of people sign up to be organ donors, which is an easy and quick thing to do in many countries, including South Africa.
Well, we're going to talk about that and see how easy it really is. Yes.
And then, yeah, just saying you're willing to be an organ donor and also at the end of life, actually following through with that, with your family members knowing that you want to be an organ donor. And so what happens is patients take up from anywhere from 3 to 5 years waiting for a kidney. From the time that they're listed.
3 to 5 years. And generally from a prognosis point of view, if you have got failing kidneys, is 3 to 5 years a reasonable amount of time for you to still hang on?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to be on dialysis, which is that machine that pulls out all your blood, cleans it for you, and puts it back in because your kidney's not doing the job of that. So you need a machine to replace it. But that is obviously a big toll on your body. To have a machine take out all of your blood, clean it out, and then put it back in for 3 to 5 years, that
obviously does impact on your body. And your kidney obviously doesn't get any stronger.
No, so you will survive, you know, but it starts to become a mental game. Like you're sitting at the dialysis machine and this is happening 3 times a week.
Wow.
For 3 to 3 hours.
I noticed that Govinda in Nepal, he was just saying now that kidney transplants are so expensive that people just unfortunately die because they don't have the means to have a transplant. What does it cost to have a transplant? How expensive is it? If it's only a 3-hour op, you know, it must be a little bit more expensive than a regular 3-hour op.
Yeah. I mean, I think it depends on the country and insurance, who's paying for it, right? So in the US, we have Medicare, and that's covering dialysis, and it's covering a lot of the transplant care. But then here you have either private or public, you know, Med-Aid or not Med-Aid. Is the government paying for it? Things like that. I'm not sure what it is in Nepal.
So, Governor, you're going to have to tell us, do you guys have medical aid or some sort of medical insurance in Nepal? Or you're talking just in terms of the general people there? You can just type your response, then we'll check it out. Okay, so kidneys is I think a kidney is a little bit easier to get because people can still give one while they're alive.
Yeah.
Liver, you don't need the whole one, you only need a part. So I'm assuming that people can be alive and still give a part of their liver.
That's true.
And how long does it take to regenerate and go back to where it was before?
I actually don't know the answer off the top of my head.
Long time, short time. Government just gives nominal help, which obviously is not a lot.
Yeah,
in Nepal.
yeah, I know. That is one of the things. But at the same time, dialysis is actually more expensive than a transplant, because if you're on like if you have kidney failure, you can die, yes, or you go and get dialysis. How long are you going to be on dialysis for? Are you going to be on dialysis for 10 years? That adds up. The cost of dialysis is actually more expensive than the cost of a transplant, which is why we push transplant all the time.
Okay, so now we're going to get into deeper waters here. So kidney and liver you can give while you're alive.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really impact on your life that much. Heart and lungs, a little bit trickier because you have to be dead to give those things.
Yes.
Now, you said it's relatively easy to become an organ donor, and I would technically agree because I've signed up to be an organ donor, and I've said they can have whatever they like because I'm certainly not taking all of this with me. They might just have a look at what they've got and say, no, it's fine, we're going to politely decline, and that's up to them.
Exactly.
But the reality is that when I die, my family might step up and say, excuse me, what did he say? He wants to give his, no, wait, put it all back in, we're not giving permission.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that situation?
That is one of the largest reasons the consent rates are so low everywhere around the world. Because they're legal in a lot of legal, I think one of the laws say that there's like an order of next of kin. Like at least here in South Africa, there's a specific order on who has that decision at the end of your life.
Who does get that decision?
Are you asking me or are you telling me?
I'm asking.
Oh, okay. So it's usually the elderly. So it would be like your parents, your grandparents, and then it'll go down to your spouse. Then if none of those people are there, it'll go
Why
down
would
to
your parents have preference over your spouse?
Exactly. This is where a lot of the complexity and nuances come in. Which
so then we go back to the original point. You said organ donation is easy. I would hazard that maybe it's not so simple.
Well, I think the first part is not enough people are talking about it. Not enough people know about it. I think another thing is not a lot of people want to talk about death, right? It's something that might happen, will happen around the time of death. And the topic of death is very taboo. I think it still is in a lot of cultures and a lot of places. So these are all things that contribute to this hard conversation and low organ donation rates and conversations about this. And then what we're talking about is sort of the medical and legal nuances that also come with that, even after the
but in different countries, they have different rules.
They do have different rules. And yes, at the end of the day, your next of kin can say, no, put the organs back in, even though, you know, they do. Okay,
so now let's talk death for a second, because I don't have a problem talking about it. I'm driving my car along the road. I have an accident.
Yep.
And they take me into the hospital. And unfortunately, after a couple of hours of trying to resuscitate me, I die.
Okay.
How do people know that I'm an organ donor? How do they know that I died at that moment?
So you should have, this is one thing that you should do, is have conversations with your family about your wishes at the end of life, whenever it comes and however it comes, that you want your organs to be donated, so that at that time they know.
They agree. And then when I die, they go, no, we don't agree. What how can you take the opinion of a dead guy? I mean, we're the ones who make the decision.
I know. And so that can happen. You could tell your wife all the time, I need you to donate my organs when I die. But when it happens in that time, it's very emotional, and people, you know, it's hard to make clear decisions at that time. And so she can totally flip and say no. And then that will be a no. We're not going to override that. That is your next of kin. And they say no.
So let's say they say yes.
Okay.
And now all of a sudden, and I did see that we had a comment there, I think that was from Govinda. He said about 14 years ago, the ultrasound report says that my wife had one kidney missing.
Oh, wow.
But when done again, the report says both kidneys are functioning well.
What?
So how do you miss
a kidney?
Govinda, I can just tell you now, if you're going to a hospital that missed the kidney,
go to a different hospital.
Just get a second opinion. Because, I mean, that's quite scary. I mean, that's like, you know, your wife is ready to give birth to your son, and then you discover it's a son and daughter. Yeah. How do they not know that they are twins? That's quite scary.
Yeah, that was.
So let's say, for example, I've been put onto the machine. They say, I'm afraid, time to go. My family know that I want to give my organs. Who contacts the organ collectors? I mean, what happens? The hospital go, okay, we've got one over here. Get the icebox out. Let's just start pulling all these things out. How does it all work?
Yeah, so there are going to be transplant coordinators that basically are called. If you basically would be a referral. So if they see somebody has passed away in the ICU or in trauma, you will be referred to the transplant coordinator.
Don't they automatically then contact the family and say,
yes,
would you consider this, even if you haven't signed for it?
The transplant coordinators will do that.
Okay.
But again, it's up to that person in that moment. Are they in the right state of mind to be saying yes or no?
Well, you can't, I mean, 48 hours to deal with a trauma, you can't wait longer than that.
No, you can't.
How long can you wait for a new organ?
It's less than 24 hours. Like you need to, that decision.
So that discussion needs to be happening way before you die.
Yes.
Okay, so let's say they've all agreed. The coordinator comes in and says, okay, we've got a win here.
Yeah.
They bring their ice bucket.
They do bring the ice bucket.
Oh, really? It is like a proper ice bucket? A cooler bag. They throw who takes it out?
The surgeon.
Okay. The surgeons take it out, they pop it in, and then they take it to be cleaned.
Yeah, and then we know who it's going to.
How do you know who it's going to?
Allocation policies. So we have a huge wait list, right?
You know what blood type I am. You've obviously done tissue typing and that type of thing.
Exactly. And then we have another database that's on this side, and it has everybody who's been waiting for a kidney or a liver or a heart. And so we just see who is the next on the list, and it goes by how long have you been waiting. So
it's first come, first serve, not first come, first son of the wealthy governor who would also like a kidney situation.
Right. First come, first serve plus emergencies. So if a patient starts deteriorating, they're number 5 on the list, but all of a sudden they're deteriorating really, really fast, that could bump them up to number 1 versus number 5. So that's what I'm saying.
Who determines how they deteriorate?
All the doctors who are watching these
cases. So it's a complicated process. It's not a case of, yeah, they've donated it, we've got the allocation, boom, sorted out. So now all of a sudden, I donate. Does the person who gets my organ have a right to find out who gave them that organ? Or am I anonymous?
You're anonymous, but they do get to know maybe like your age, and I think just like baseline health characteristics of it.
But if I wanted them to know who I am, could I make that?
But you're dead.
Yeah, but I want the person to know that the person that died gave of themselves to them.
You can tell your next of kin that, and then you can see. The other thing is some recipients don't want to know who their donor is. Some recipients don't want to know if I got it from a male or a female, if it was a 30-year-old or a 50-year-old. What if, like, as a recipient, I don't want to know? So you could want to tell me, but I can also not want to know. So they both need to want to know.
Okay, fair enough.
Right?
So what about the fact that I am 26 years old and I get the liver of someone who is 63 years old, is that going to impact on my health if I had rather got one from a 26-year-old?
Generally, yes. So, yes,
So you want to get the younger person. So then I'm on the list to get a kidney, and then you go, well, good news. He's 95 years old, and we're giving you the kidneys tomorrow. And you're like, can I wait a little bit longer? Can you bump me down?
No, I mean, I think at that point, anything will do, to be honest. I think you're going to be, if you're on dialysis, you're going to want that transplant as soon as possible. So it doesn't matter what age or where it came from or what it is. If it works, that's great. But here's what I'll tell you. Obviously, we're sort of made to live up to 100 years, and so is your organs. So if your kidney, you die and you're 20 years old, your kidney now has 80 more years of life.
Okay.
And now if my mom dies and she's 50, her kidney has 50 years of life. So this starts to become a really interesting problem in pediatric transplants.
You can't put a 50-year-old's kidney in a 2-year-old body because you're only giving them effectively 50 years.
Yes, and the size of that kidney is probably going to be larger.
Okay.
But that's where it gets complicated when, if you're my dad and I'm the daughter and you want to give your kidney to me, but, how many years is that kidney versus somebody else who passed away? Even
though it's a match. Yeah. So maybe they see it as a temporary, like for the next 30 years, and by then technology would have improved and maybe we can...
And so this is when I think behavioral economics and decision-making really come into play, like economics of decision-making. Like, should I get a kidney from a living person versus a deceased person? Should I get it from a 60-year-old or a 30-year-old? Like, what's going to happen? And especially in the pediatric transplant field, if you get a transplant when you're 10 years old, you're going to need another transplant when you're 50.
And you obviously don't want that.
You don't want that, but...
Sure. So now, I mean, things are getting complicated because let's pretend I'm very wealthy and I want a kidney, but I don't believe in queues. Could I, for example, go to another country and bump myself up to the top of the line if I paid a little bit extra?
Not legally.
I wasn't talking about the legal side. I was saying, could I potentially do that?
Yes, you could. And that's sort of where the field of organ trafficking and organ travel comes into play.
So what is the difference between organ trafficking and organ travel?
So organ travel is sort of what you were describing, that you have a lot of money and you're able to travel to another country that has a transplant program. Another time organ travel comes into play is when your home country doesn't have a transplant center. So let's take Zambia, for example, country right above us. They don't have a transplant center. They don't have transplant surgeons. They don't have transplant hospitals. So what are the patients going to do there? They're either going to fly down to South Africa or fly to wherever, India or Europe. So that is a case of organ travel. They have to, by necessity, because their country doesn't have a transplant center and transplant facilities. Then trafficking comes into play when you are basically exploiting somebody and paying somebody for their organs or their kidney. So that
now,
you can
I mean, people generally have the rights to sell their eggs, their sperm, but they could also sell their kidneys too.
That is illegal everywhere. But
why?
Right, I know.
It's my kidney, my body. If I want to sell a kidney, what's wrong with that?
You could do it. I'm just going to keep my eyes closed.
Okay, so there's certain body parts that you start putting limits on as to whether it's legal or not.
Yeah, and I think it's a difficult, again, complex area. People are selling their eggs and people are selling their sperm for different amounts. You could see it. There's a market, yes. I think organ trafficking comes into similar things like drug trafficking, right? And human trafficking,
buyer.
So that's where it gets gray.
So when someone talks about organ trafficking, there's almost like a sinister underlying theme that maybe it's obviously not legal, but
Right.
but there are contentious issues around that.
Mm-hmm.
So how does a government deal with issues like that? Do you need a special police force to handle organ trafficking?
That would be great. That would be great. That does not occur right now, but I think that would
So
be
how?
great.
So what if you could? What would your ideal situation be to monitor? I mean, how do you monitor organ trafficking?
Mm-hmm.
How do you know it's happening?
Yeah.
How do you close down those sorts of networks? I mean, those are difficult questions.
They are difficult questions, and they're difficult ways. Like, how do you shut down human trafficking or slavery that might still be going on today? Like on ships, on the trade routes, like people are just putting other humans on that, and they're getting shipped with their sugar and with their flour that you're trading around. Humans are also getting onto that trade. So I think you came up with a great solution of just having a police force.
A police force.
I mean, another thing is people speaking up. But the problem is, if I'm a transplant surgeon doing these transplants, am I really gonna tell you or report that? It's gonna have to be someone else.
But here's the tough thing. They're actually helping people. So they don't see what they're doing as doing something bad.
Mm-hmm.
If someone is going to die because they need an organ and you are going to give them that organ, you're doing good stuff, not bad stuff. So then it becomes very gray, because if I say to you, here is my kidney, put it on ice, $50,000. And a private person says, I need a kidney, I'll take it for $50,000. The surgeon goes, I'm going to save this man's life. I'm going to give him a chance to survive by giving him this kidney. What's the problem with that?
Yeah, no, I agree. There have been cases where it benefits both parties. So, there are people in, let's say, Brazil or India who needed money, to pay off loans or to pay off whatever it is, debts that they had. And they were able to get 20 grand by selling off their kidney. Now, that party benefited and was able to pay off their debts, and then the person who needed a kidney also benefited. I think what starts to get complicated again is now, how is the health of the person who donated their kidney and who is taking care of them afterwards? Now, if that person in India donated their kidney for 20 grand to pay off their debt, what if he gets an infection and passes away the next day? Now, where is his long-term follow-up care? You just donated a kidney, and then one person is basically now benefiting, and that this person is dead. It's
complicated stuff.
Yeah.
So I like to ask the interesting questions. I mean, I'm just curious. You live in a foreign country. What does a kidney go for?
I think, what's funny? Kidneys go for a different amount in different countries. I think I've even seen like 3 different prices in one country. I'm not going to say the countries, but look, I think
throw out some numbers so we know what people are actually getting for their kidneys.
Like in the $20,000 to $50,000 range.
That's a lot of money. And if you've got 2 kidneys, you could double your. But no, that's not a good idea. That's not a good idea.
No.
Wow. Okay, so we've learned a little bit about the fact that organs are not easy to come by.
No.
We know that the process of getting it from the person who is deceased to the person that needs it is complicated.
Correct.
We've realized that once the person gets it, and it's complicated to keep it because there's medication and rejection and a whole bunch of other things. What about technology and how we're moving towards the future and 3D printing organs? Are we going to get to a stage where you will go take a swab, get your skin cells, whatever it is, the stem cells, and then they go and 3D print a liver for you, and in 3 months' time, they go and put it in you, and you don't need to take any rejection medicine because it's your liver?
Yes, but I think that's maybe 30 years away. I think right now what people have been able to do is print simple structures, let's say like a trachea, it's just like a tube, right?
Okay.
But when you're getting again into the kidneys or the livers with all that vasculature, with all those veins and arteries, it gets really complicated to tell the printer to print all of those little veins and arteries in there. So we're not there yet.
Yes.
But once we are, that's going to be great. And then you have to test it out in animal models. And then you're going to have to test it out in human trials. And so that's why I'm adding about 30 years before it's actually.
But 30 years is not so far away.
No, it's not.
When did we start the first human transplant, a heart transplant? 1950?
Yeah.
So 50 to the year 2000 is 50 years.
Yeah, and we came a long way.
We're only talking 30 years, maybe even less, maybe 10 or 12.
Yeah.
And then people do not have to worry about being put on lists waiting for organs. They go and get their own.
Yes, or organ trafficking, any of those issues.
Or we could build robotic versions of that organ, and then we can just put it in straight away. How close are we to that?
30 more, 30 to 50 years.
So you think we're further away for
robotic
organs? I mean, we've got pacemakers, we've got, they've managed to take a heart machine and reduce that to actually fit. You wear a packet and this will act as the same, will do all the things that your heart would normally do. Do you reckon that it's still 30 years away from those kind of breakthroughs?
I don't think, I mean, this is not, so pacemaker has to do with the electrical conductivity of your heart.
It's not actually.
So yeah, your kidney isn't doing that, and it's not based on electric, circuits. So the robotic kidney is not something that would work. Whereas that's why I'm saying we're going to need to wait for stem cell printing of an actual kidney, not a robotic kidney.
I mean, I can understand if people, want to get toxins out of their liver. If you had a robotic liver, then you could just drink and then push the button to go to turbo mode, and then it would process things, and people wouldn't, have to struggle with, being babalas, which is that South African term when you have a hangover in the morning, the next morning. So, and I can see we've got about 20 viewers or classrooms around the world that have joined us. And I see that Mr. McNulty's also joined us, and Govind has been giving us a couple of comments, and Dondi in Hungary has also been giving us a couple of comments. Are there any people in your class, Mr. McNulty, that would like to ask any questions?
Let me ask them right now. We'll get right back to you.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool. I've got lots of questions to ask anyway. So, and if there are any viewers that are watching it live, you can send an email to info@livingmaths.com. and send us your question, and we'll be glad to answer. But I see that you've got one student who's got a question. So, you want to unmute? There we go.
Tyler Clausen. I was wondering if it's ever been doing. Has it ever been? Have you ever gotten sickened by, messing with organs and stuff?
You're going to have to repeat the question?
Could you explain the dangers of infection for the medical professionals?
So the risks to you when you go in and do these, because you would do an HIV-to-HIV transmission, there are huge risks for you.
That's what people think, which is funny. But basically, it's the same thing. You would take, as a medical profession, you should be trained so that you don't know what you're about to face. You have gears, you have your gloves, you have your shields, you have masks. Everything that I would wear for a normal kidney transplant would be just the same as HIV. We're not doing anything differently. It's not like we're putting on 2 pairs of gloves. There's no extra gowns. It's all the same, because you need to assume that the patient could have anything. Maybe that wasn't caught before on a medical record. So you could be going into a normal transplant, and then 5 minutes later you find out that they have HIV. What are you going to do? Go run and get an extra pair of gloves? No, that's not the case. So when you are trained to go into these theaters and to do these surgeries, we are, gowning up, and putting on all the normal precautions that we would have. And there's no difference between the HIV transplants and the ones without.
That was a good question.
Yeah.
And if you've got more, just let us know, because we love answering questions. The other issue, of course, is that, you know, as a surgeon, there aren't many doctors that do these transplants. So what about the countries that don't have doctors that can do these transplants?
Yeah.
Well, let's give her a chance to ask the question. We'll come back to that one. Fire away.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Alora, and I am just wondering, what is the most difficult part about being in the medical field?
What is the most difficult part about being?
Yeah, about being in the medical field.
Oh, what's the most difficult part about being in the medical field? And I also want you to touch on the fact that sometimes it's not even medical. It could be legal or ethical things that go with it.
Yeah.
That's good.
I think one of the hardest parts is probably continuing to be persistent and excited about your job every day, especially when you're dealing with death, right? So when you are dealing with health and life and medicine, you are dealing with death at the same time. And so you don't know if your day is, you want your day to be great. Everybody wants to wake up in the morning and have a great day at work or a great day at what they do. But the reality is you are going to lose some patients. And so I think that is one of the hardest things that people in the medical profession have to deal with. And then overcoming deaths after deaths after deaths, and, you know, going to the next case with just as much enthusiasm as the next. So I think it's just being able to be resilient and persistent, you know, in your training, and reminding yourself of what you're doing and why you're doing it, and that you are helping people, regardless of some of the cases that you may win or lose.
So how does it, I mean, yeah, how many transplants have you been involved with?
I mean, so I've observed, way too many. I don't even know how many. Since I've been here, maybe like 5, just because I've been focused more on my research here in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
But back when I was in the US, yeah, maybe like 10 or so.
Is that a lot?
Not that many.
Not that many.
Not that many.
Okay, because I mean, do you find
They do around 100
that certain countries there'll be more transplants to do than? I mean, obviously the size of the US is much bigger than other countries, so you would have access to more transplants.
Right. And so it's also about the volume of your transplant center. How many surgeons do you have, and how many transplants are you doing? So back in the States, they're doing 100 a year, whereas here they might be doing 50 a year or 30 a year. So the transplant volume varies depending on where you are.
Let's get controversial for a bit.
Yeah.
And I see David also joined us there from Chicago. Hi, David. You came to South Africa for a reason.
I did.
What was your reason?
I needed to know where these controversial HIV-to-HIV transplants started and how they started.
And for those of you who weren't in the beginning, Coco mentioned that she came to South Africa because there was a pioneering effort to do HIV-to-HIV organ transplants, because, you know, if you are HIV positive, to get an organ from someone who isn't is really difficult. And I'm sure that there's an ethical debate over whether someone wants to give an organ to someone with HIV, thinking, I'd rather give my organ to someone who isn't HIV. Can you specify?
No, you can't specify.
You can't. Okay, but doctors would prefer not to give a regular organ to an HIV person. They would rather give it to someone who does not have HIV. Is that correct?
Right, because there's so many people who need kidneys and not enough kidneys to go around. So we can't give an HIV positive kidney to someone who doesn't have HIV, because then I'd just be giving you HIV, and that's not something you would do. So you need to have kidneys that don't have HIV for the people who don't have HIV, and now you have kidneys that are being used that have HIV for patients who have HIV. So it's really opened up actually more of the organs, more of the organ pool, and the transplants for patients without HIV.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about your mentor.
Okay, so she's fantastic.
Okay.
And she actually went through probably one of the toughest times to make one of these big breakthroughs happen, which I think is common in anybody who pioneers something. So in 2008, around 2006 and 2007, there was the era of HIV denialism here in South Africa.
Oh, it was, I mean, you could write stories about this stuff.
You can also just look it up and read about it after this. Basically, there was a president who basically said that HIV doesn't cause AIDS. And so when your president says something like that, I think the country or the community starts to think that that's true.
Okay.
And everyone was
not everyone, but
yeah,
a large portion of uneducated people would agree with that.
Yeah, would agree with that statement. And so that was one of the largest battles when your president is saying comments like that. And it was during that time, plus the HIV epidemic surge here in South Africa, that my mentor, Dr. Elmi Muller, transplanted a kidney from someone with HIV into someone else with HIV without any sort of knowledge about if it's going to work or not. She was the first person in the world, in the entire world, to perform these surgeries. And she had no evidence to go on before doing that. She just had a hunch, you know? She just thought, this can work, it could work, it's an option, or else these patients are gonna die. So it's like, would you take the chance or do you go home to die? So after getting consent from her patients, and they were like, you know what, I'll give it a shot. You had some courageous patients also on board. And so she transplanted them, and then the entire university and, you know, her colleagues and also just the government basically attacked her and shut her down and said, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? You know, this is like highly stigmatized population. They currently don't have access to all of these other types of care. How are you giving them transplants? And so they actually stopped her. They stopped her from performing those transplants for about 2 years. And in those 2 years, 4 patients died that could have survived from her transplants. And then they wanted her to continue her work under research auspices. So then when these transplants started to come back, they had to be under a research trial. And so till today, these transplants are under research. But it's 2018 now, and it's coming up to the 10-year anniversary of her first one. You know, the results have been fantastic. And usually after you've trialed in humans for 10 years and you can show that the results are just as good, you know, you start to move away from something under a research into clinical practice. And that's where we are here in South Africa. In the US, they started transplanting in 2015. So they still have a few years to go to sort of gather all that evidence and publish that, and then it'll be just normal clinical practice.
But now, did she go to the US during the 2 years when she was blocked to go and teach or learn anywhere else, or was that it? Just shut down for 2 years and nothing happened?
It was shut down for 2 years and nothing happened. She stayed here and she was just trying to figure out, what is she supposed to do? I mean,
wow.
What do you do?
What do you do? And I mean, the irony is that she was pioneering something that now is taking place in other countries around the world.
Correct. And so in the US, that's sort of where it started. I was there with my group at Johns Hopkins, and we realized in the US that there was actually a law in place that banned the use of HIV organs. And so what the US had to do, it's similar to the Chris Barnard case of heart transplants and using brain death and brain death organs. But basically, the law said you must throw out these kidneys with HIV. And so we, again, with the progress in technology and medicine, people with HIV are living just as long as everybody else. Treatment's been great. People are living till 85. ARVs are great. So this law was outdated. And so what our group did over there was estimate how many people can we save if we were able to overturn this law. And they estimated 500 to 600 lives a year.
Wow.
They took that estimation and they lobbied, you know, to Congress, and then eventually President Obama back in 2013 signed the HOPE Act, which is the HIV Organ Policy Equity Act. And he basically said, you are now allowed to use HIV organs. So that happened in 2013. And then the first one in the US happened in 2015. So it took about 2 years from the time that it was signed to finding the right match, you know, the first one.
Okay, well, here's an interesting question. If I want to be an organ donor, I don't get paid to give that organ to anyone when I'm dead.
No.
But if I wanted to donate an organ to someone for money, you can understand why some people would choose to give certain organs for money, obviously, if they're going to benefit from that. In poor countries, there might be people who are not donating, but the organs are taken from them.
Yes, that's correct.
So that's slightly different to organ trafficking. That's more of a crime syndicate that is actually targeting poor people.
Yeah, that's the exploitation part of organ trafficking. So that is organ trafficking. Yeah.
Wow.
Sure.
How vast is organ trafficking? Is it very common? Is it only in certain countries, or is it big business?
I think it's a big business. I think people have estimated in the billions of dollars at this point a year. And I think it's hard to know because there's not enough evidence or research going on about it. I can't sit here and give you a great estimate because it's so hard to track. It's so hard to find. So I can't tell you how many cases there are happening, but I know they are happening, and they're happening in every country. It's not just the poor ones. It's not just the rich ones. It can be happening anywhere around the world. So I think it's just coming up with the right methods on how to track it effectively. Sure.
Well, I did notice that John B. from Hungary wanted to know what will be the next organ to transplant in the future. So, and David did ask about the president, what would drive him to make that statement. And I think that it was a little bit of political drive behind there, because when a new government comes in, you need to reject certain modalities around you. And there was even the suggestion from the health minister that to improve your condition with AIDS and HIV, you would just need to take garlic and potatoes and things like that. It was quite an embarrassing time in our history. And fortunately, it didn't get any better with the next president, who he had a case against him where he had improper relations with a woman who had HIV, and he, being the chairperson of the HIV working committee, stood up and said, "It's okay, I had a shower afterwards," and completely spelled out his ignorance towards the topic. And there's a well-known comic in South Africa called Zapira, and every character that he draws of that particular president, he has a shower over his head. And that's always stuck with him ever since. And if you want, I can send you links to some great cartoons about that. So going back to Dondi's comment, she wants to know, like, what will be the next organ transplant? So the next organ to transplant in the future? Because what are the organs we normally transplant?
I mean, it's almost everything other than the brain right now. I mean, it's your heart, your lungs, your liver, your pancreas, your kidneys. You're doing skin transplants. We're doing corneal transplants. You know, there was news just recently from Hopkins on the penis and scrotum transplant. So there's a lot. There's uterus transplants actually going on in
and people have actually given birth after that.
Exactly.
That is just mind-blowing.
So to be honest, I think the next, I would imagine, would actually just be these 3D printed ones, because I think we've basically taken a stab at all the other organs that you could possibly transplant at this time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sure. Are there any other questions that you guys want to ask? Because we only got a couple of minutes left and there's still so much to talk about. Mr. McNulty, anyone in your class got a question?
Well, I just had a question. And where, Dr. Kumar, where are you from?
Johns Hopkins, Baltimore, Maryland.
Ah, near us. We're in Philadelphia, or north of Philadelphia.
Yay! Classroom from the U.S. Woo!
We're out in Newtown, and,
Exactly.
and it really is a one-horse town, and I've been and I've seen that horse.
Wait, how many of those kids are signed up to be an organ donor, or how old are they?
Well, you got in Pennsylvania, that comes with a driver's license. So
yes, I know.
And I did mention that to them, that's part of the driver's license application. You can agree to become an organ donor on the driver's license, and then they put a sticker on it. You know, I could show you mine, but yeah, so then it's on your license, and we'll talk about that afterwards, I think.
Right.
I'm curious. Can we get a show of hands? How many of the students there would be willing to donate their organs when they die? And how many of your parents would agree with that?
Are you sure?
Maybe. About that?
Maybe you can have a conversation tonight at dinner.
It's absolutely fascinating, because we were just discussing a little bit earlier that, you know, I might give consent and I might sign all the documentation and say, you can have whatever you like. But then my family, once I've died, say, no, 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 no. We want the whole body buried. We don't want anything missing. And then who do you give permission to? I mean, who has the final say in that particular matter?
Well, I think that's why it's part of the driver's license. It's an agreement. It's decided in advance.
What is decided? Which organs?
That they don't really mention on the application.
No, they don't. And so that's actually what happens when you actually come in face-to-face and you have that paper with the transplant coordinator and your next of kin. They'll ask you, what organs are you willing to donate? And so that's...
Now, here's something very interesting. David, you mentioned something. Let's have a look at your comment. You said here that your mother donated most of her organs upon her death, and they kept her body alive to get 4 patients to Chicago for the transplant. And it was pretty amazing to know that she saved 4 lives the day that she died.
Yeah.
Now, David, here's a quick question. Have you ever wondered about meeting those people?
Yes, I have wondered about meeting those people. I know that her heart was given to somebody, her lungs were given, and her liver and kidneys were all given. And I've never really, wanted to really meet them in person. I just know that it's a pretty amazing gift that she gave the day that she died, knowing that 4 people were in the emergency room, or in the surgery rooms, getting her organs right away.
Yeah.
So it was a great, the best gift she could ever give someone.
Yeah. Now, I know how close you were to your mom and your dad. So This is going to be a tough question for you. And that is, if you ever met the person that had her heart inside, and I've watched those videos where they give the person the stethoscope and they say, how would you like to hear your mother's heartbeat? That would be insane.
Yeah, that would be mind-blowing for sure. For sure.
But I think like what you said, the fact that she could save 4 people's lives on the day that she died is such a big deal. And how else would you want to leave, this earth? You knowing that you're helping someone on your last day, that's we don't help enough people every day, but at least on the day that you die, you could say that you've helped this many people.
Yeah, they kept her alive for 3 days on life support just to get those people in place and fly them to Chicago, because they were on the donor list, but they weren't in Chicago. They were around the country. So
exactly. Wow. Yeah,
it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Sure, that is amazing. Yeah. What was that last question I was going to ask you now? It'll come back to me. So now we've gone through the whole process of how you give consent to donate your organs. We've spoken about the fact that you can give different types of organs. We've spoken about the fact that medicine has obviously advanced to such a level, and that governments are now passing laws and policies to enable all these things. Do you think we're going to get to a point where we no longer need to go and source the organs from people, that we'll just be able to harvest or electronically build those organs, and that will solve all our problems?
Yes. And I think we're all waiting for that day, because it's sort of it's difficult. This is a great way. Deceased donation is great, but some people still find it hard to ask people who are living for an organ. And so if we can avoid those conversations, those awkward conversations that people have to have right now, and avoid this huge gap, if these organs are just being printed, I think yes, that will avoid a lot of these complicated issues.
Let's give you a tough question.
Oh no.
Religion.
Yes.
Not all religions are okay with the fact that you want parts of the body and they want you to be buried whole.
Yeah, so that's, I think.
What are your comments about that?
I think it's actually cultural versus religion, because I think people have studied the various religions, and it doesn't say anywhere specifically in any of them. But if someone wants to bring it up, totally, you can, tell me and correct me. But no religions say anything against organ donation. But culturally, that's where things change.
Okay.
So culturally, if your funeral practices mandate or are encouraged to have your body whole or full or anything of that sort, that's where some of these issues come into play. And at the end of the day, it's your beliefs. No one's going to change that. And no one in the organ donation or transplant community is going to force you to do something that you don't want to do.
Of course.
All of this is your decision and your choice. And so we're just trying to get the education and awareness out there, and then it's up to you.
Sure. I mean, there are ethics and morals involved. There are sensitivities. I mean, there are families at play. There are emotions. There's costs involved. There are risks involved. I mean, it really is a complicated business.
Yeah.
And you love what you do.
Yeah. Did you see how many complicated, complex conversations we just had in an hour? That's what I have to work with every day, and it's great. My mind never gets bored.
So now, what are you doing besides the work that you're doing? Because I know that you're a busy woman. Yes.
Currently, I'm making a documentary on the first HIV-to-HIV kidney transplants. And I'll be filming here in I have been filming here in South Africa, and I'll be coming to the US to film back home. And then in the UK to sort of basically track what happened, how it started, where it started, and then where it flourished too. So that's something.
Are any of the patients still alive?
Yeah.
That's very exciting stuff.
Of course they're alive.
It was 10 years ago.
Yep, they're alive. They're doing well. They're doing very well.
That is fantastic. Wow. I'm amazed at that.
Yeah.
And what are your plans for the future, apart from the documentary? You want to set up any new structures in other countries? Maybe make the whole transplant process easier?
Yes,
set up a police force?
Of course, yes. I do want to work on organ trafficking. I do want to figure out how we can get better at tracking that, gathering evidence for that. I also think there are things that we spoke about within the organ donation process to make it more streamlined and efficient and easier and less complicated. So I think after this documentary, that's where I'll be focusing my attention.
Okay. And finally, we have some young people in Mr. Konasek's class. Hello, everyone there.
Hi.
And the question I have for you is, what advice would you give young people with regards to getting into this sort of profession? Because obviously we're trying to promote math, science, technology, and engineering and medical science. So what advice would you give these young people in Mr. McNulty's class and Mr. Konasek's class? What advice would you give them?
Do what you love, follow your passions, and take every opportunity you see in front of you. Don't take no for an answer either.
Don't take no for an answer. I like that. Wow. And of all the cases that you've ever dealt with, what has been, obviously losing a patient must be incredibly difficult. And they talk about transference where you connect with the patient and then you get personal connection with them, and then they pass away, and then, it really impacts you every time. What are the most, well, let me ask you this. Okay, I've got two questions. So how does that impact on you?
I think we said that before. So it's very, very difficult, but that always stays with you. And I think one thing that happens is you always learn from your mistakes. You learn from your mistakes. You learn from patients you lose. You learn from anything and everything you do. I'm learning from this little interaction we're having now. So any type of time where you fall or you make a mistake, you're learning from that. So just keep that in mind, regardless of how hard it is or whatever happened.
Do you believe in life after death? And I'll tell you why. Because, you know, you watch these documentaries on TV where people say that they were on the table, the heart was stopped, and they were looking above, down, below, and then all of a sudden they got a new heart, and then they were brought to life again, and then they do you believe any of that?
No.
You don't. The short answer, I like that. I like that.
I'm sorry, I don't. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the stuff can be quite anecdotal, and many people swear by what they've seen, but from a science point of view.
I'm not there yet. I mean, I haven't been on the table and I haven't seen the light, so I don't really know.
Okay. And hopefully you'll be around for many, many years facilitating many transplants.
If not, you can have my organs.
Okay. Are you an organ donor?
Of course.
Can you imagine?
In 2 countries. I'm an organ donor in 2 countries.
So you actually have to...
I registered here in South Africa as well.
But now, if I wanted to go and register in other countries, could I do that?
Yeah, but I think it's because I'm living here and I could pass away and like what's going to happen.
Okay.
So I want to make sure that, you know, even if I do, my organs would be donated. Not if you're traveling around for 2 weeks somewhere and you just sign up everywhere. That's silly.
Wow. Well, Koko, I would like to thank you very much for the most incredibly fascinating interview. We had well over 25 viewing parties at any one moment from all over the world. We even had Dondi in Hungary. We had Mr. McNulty in Newtown. We had Mr. K's class there in Chicago. And we had Govinda in Nepal. And we had Jason also out in the US. So we had a wide variety. We've got a lot of homeschoolers who are also watching this live. So thank you very much to all of you that were joining us. And to Mr. K's class, I hope that your breakout went well. Do any of your kids have any questions? We got a minute or two if you want to ask a question.
Oh, we have
a question. So unmute it. You're going to have no questions.
No, we don't have any questions.
Oh, I thought you had a question. I saw a hand at the back there. They were just waving. Any questions?
They were waving. Yeah, I think they were waving.
How many of these kids are willing to donate their organs?
How many would you if you could? Because you have to be 16 to do it with a driver's license.
Mm-hmm.
So
deliver your
some
organ?
people? No.
I probably. If it's a heart, then no.
I think
the young lady who said she won't give her heart, but
yeah, I think it has to do with
what is your name?
And not understanding it yet.
Yeah, what is your name with the glasses?
Yeah.
Crystal, you wouldn't give your heart, but what other parts would you give?
Appendix? You don't.
Let me ask you this. If you were not alive, would you even care what parts you gave? You're not there.
No,
So then you donate the whole.
Okay. So if you die, you give everything.
Yeah. Like, obviously, I'm dead. I don't care. Like, even if I know that I'm gonna die, I'll just donate.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
I would just donate it.
I love the conversation that you guys are spurring today in the class, though, because I have a feeling these guys are going to question and ask this question about it. So
well, it's important to ask these kinds of questions, because what would happen, and I would hate for this to happen, but I mean, I've taught young kids where, for example, a child needs a bone marrow transplant, or perhaps, for example, a child needs a new kidney or a new liver, and you think to yourself, well, they're now sitting on this waiting list, waiting for someone to give them that organ. Who is that person going to be? And obviously, the more people who put themselves on the list saying that we are willing to give an organ, the better the chance that that young person is going to live.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
Your homework today is to go talk to your parents about it.
Yep.
Okay.
Extra homework.
I know that some of the students in the class, a religious aspect comes into play too.
Correct.
So I know that in like the Jewish faith, for example, you have to have your whole body intact to be buried.
Although there is a lot of discussion about that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, let me ask you this. If in the Jewish faith they say that you have to bury yourself whole, what about the idea that your heart could save someone else's life?
I think another thing that it's like a funny, sort of funny, but not really funny, but if you know, let's just say you are Jewish and you were in a car accident and your leg was amputated, right? Below the knee, you had a below the knee amputation. Now, is your body, when you pass away, whole?
No.
So what's the difference? What's the difference between that and then donating your heart?
Yeah.
This is where the interesting discussions come in.
You see, so one, you're actually helping others in need. You know, you are actually donating all of your organs, but it's just this mindset of how you're thinking about these, you know, concepts and ideas. And if you think of it that way, is your body really whole? And how does that contradict the religion, you know?
Yeah.
Well, we've now opened a whole can of worms for you guys to think about.
Yeah, and that's the kind of challenges kids need.
Well, I've always believed that the best way to teach is to start off with a question. And when you do that, you let the conversation lead to learning, because that's what real learning is about.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us. And tomorrow night at 6 p.m., which is an hour earlier than this, we've got Jim Garvin from NASA. He is the chief scientist at the Goddard Center. So if you guys are there tomorrow, you're welcome to join in on that interview as well and ask all your space questions. We've also got the following week she's a paleontologist and she is a National Geographic explorer, and that's going to happen later during the day. That's at 9 o'clock South African time. So that's 2 more hours later than this. And then we've also got a model and a astronomy student who's going out there, and she's a social media guru. And we're going to talk about how she balances all of that as well. So lots of exciting interviews coming up in the next week or two.
Tomorrow. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
Cool. We'll see you. Dondi with her son.
Bye.
Thank you, Dondi, for joining us. I know that your microphone isn't working or your camera wasn't working, but thank you so much for joining us anyway. And we're going to kickstart.